Now, joining us for analysis of this ongoing violence in Colombia is Oliver Dodd. He's a PhD researcher at the University of Nottingham, specializing in Colombia. Oliver, thank you for joining us today. My first question to you: who might you suspect are the culprits behind this attempted downing of President Duque's helicopter, given the area he was flying over at the time?
Well, that's exactly one of the things we really need to understand here, the context in which Ivan Duque was flying. We're talking about a group of military helicopters that were flying over a long historic rebel stronghold. And as a response, it was most likely rebels that were returning fire in response to these military aircraft, which were following over very much a military stronghold. These are the same kind of helicopters that have been used historically to target left-wing guerrillas in the night. So it's no surprise to me that they responded with gunfire. It was only a few months ago that I was actually in the region of Catatumbo doing a face-to-face interview with one of the guerrilla commanders here. So I know very well the region, and I know very well that it's very frequent that the guerrillas return fire to military aircraft who are flying over. But the idea that this is a premeditated assassination attempt backed by Venezuela, which many in the Colombian state are making out to be the case, is ridiculous. It's a way to try to drum up support for the hostility against Venezuela and try to increase economic and military support, increases that already exist for the Colombian state in their war, not just against left-wing movements, but against civilian demonstrators.
Now, what about these deadly clashes and protests cropping up all over the country? What is driving all these young people to the streets, especially as we just saw in the video in Bogota?
Well, as your reporter mentioned, we've seen a huge escalation in the deaths and cases of coronavirus. Plus, on top of this, we've really seen decades of inequality, really since the republic was founded in Colombia, and it's actually been increasing rather than decreasing. And in the context of the coronavirus, this has actually exacerbated the situation. And more than 3 million people have been flung into extreme poverty since March 2020. So there's been a huge mobilization on the streets of Colombia in protesting against the kind of inequality that exists and spreads, but then the kind of repression that is used to take it down. Massive police violence, massive state terrorism that has been used against not just left-wing rebels, but civilians on the ground has really caused the resistance in Colombia to be much more passionate in their response to the state. So it's no surprise to me that the protests have exacerbated. And it was only last month that we saw an invasion, really, of Venezuela and an assassination of one of the leaders of the FARC, La Segunda Marquetalia, which was quite close to the Catatumbo, where we recently saw the attack against the president, but over in the Venezuelan side. And it was local witnesses that were able to actually confirm that this was commandos sent from the Colombian state, which flew back from Venezuela to Colombia. So it's no surprise that we see today a kind of gangster regime in Colombia.
Now, I'm glad you bring up the FARC. Could you explain to us the role of the FARC and of the ELN in the country right now, especially since there was a peace deal that was signed between the government and the FARC? Does that peace deal mean anything at this point?
Well, one of the things the Colombian state are trying to do, as they always have done, is try to make out the peaceful protesters to be members of the FARC, to be led by the FARC or the ELN. This is a tactic that really goes back decades. We're talking the 1960s, 50s. The left wing in Colombia, civilian demonstrators have always been accused of being terrorists. The state of the FARC and the ELN is that they're not behind. If anything, one of the means that the peaceful protesters didn't have on the streets is the means to defend themselves against the kind of state violence. So I'd argue that the FARC and the ELN have certainly not been behind the peaceful protesters, and the accusations that are being putting forward are kind of they're trying to stigmatize the situation. But the area of Catatumbo is very much controlled by these left-wing rebel movements that have grown since really what has been the betrayal of the 2016 peace agreement. They've actually grown, increased their strength in areas like Catatumbo. So it's no surprise to me that we saw these gunshots over the last few days. We have to understand this in the context of a civil war where military aircraft, like that which was flown in by the Colombian president are used regularly
Yeah.
to attack Colombian rebels.
Wow, a lot of information to take in there. Oliver Dodd, thank you so much for joining us with your expertise today.